As the diplomatic efforts over the war in Ukraine are rapidly gaining pace with the end of the year, so do the discussions on the use of Russia's frozen assets, which the EU wants to tap to help the war-torn country. And to talk about it, we're joined by Kinga Redłowska, Director of the Centre for Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute, Europe. Good evening.
Good evening.
So Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, says he will keep EU leaders debating as long as it takes, but in the end they will have to come up with a solution to the issue of Russia's frozen assets. Do you share his optimism that they will in fact do that by the end of the year?
I would like to believe that's going to be the case, because Russian frozen assets are no longer a technical issue. They are a backbone of Europe's Ukraine strategy. And the EU has been looking for ways to bridge the funding gap of Ukrainian budget, and just to make sure Kiev doesn't hit a fiscal cliff April next year. The shortfall is assessed for 70 billion euros. And then on top of that, the US is pressuring for concessions. So overall, the EU and Europe more broadly doesn't have much choice unless it wants to put more burden on EU taxpayers.
I see. Well, but so far Brussels, and I'm not talking about the European Commission, I'm talking about the beautiful country of Belgium. So Belgians are quite reluctant to release the frozen assets because they are afraid that the legal burden of what may come after will be fully placed on them. What guarantees can Belgium be provided with?
Well, so Belgium has been voicing its concerns for a long time now. They are referring to the bilateral investment treaty signed with USSR in 1989. But the European Commission's stance is clear. The European Commission claims that legal ground is clear, and on top of that, EU member states will provide guarantees against the 210 billion euros of the reparation loan that will be shared across the bloc based on the gross national income, with Germany providing a backstop of a 25% of this amount by the largest share. And this has been declared by Chancellor Merz last week.
Can Hungarians, Slovaks, or Czechs, most probably these days, just say, no, we won't pay for it?
Yes, Maciej, unfortunately then they can do so, and if they do so, it just means that other EU member states need to increase their guarantees, their backstops. Maybe other non-EU countries will chip in. So there are different options on the table. Hopefully the EU policymakers and the heads of states will reach a consensus on this very soon in Brussels.
You mentioned the US. Now, what is the American approach to EU's attempts to use the frozen assets? Because they have slightly different views, right?
Yes. You know, it's Europe that is holding those assets, namely Euroclear in Belgium, 18 billion is held in France and under the deposit of French financial institutions, and a bit more scattered across Europe. UK holds 20 billion pounds, so it's Europe that is holding this card, and of course the US would like to push Europe on this. We've seen in the first peace plan that leaked.
Yes, the 28-point plan.
Yes, the 28 points. There was a mention, there was even an outrageous proposal that the US will take those assets and this will cover US investment. This seems to be
joint US-Russian
investment. This seems to be highly unrealistic and against any legal background, but it has been a quite strong push toward EU heads of states and member states to actually reach a consensus and reach it rapidly.
Right. Now, do you think that given the recent tensions and the pressure under which the Ukrainian government finds itself in negotiations with the Americans, should Kiev still insist on the use of Russia's frozen assets?
Well, Kiev should insist. It doesn't have much choice. The plan is that out of 210 billion euros, 115 will be used for Ukraine's defense. Another 50 will fuel the Ukrainian budget, and another 45 will serve as to repay a previous G7 loan. So the money is badly needed, and indeed, Kiev should insist on Europe taking a more muscular stance on this and making a full use of those assets.
Right, because as you say, the money from the frozen assets, this is meant to cover Ukraine's expenses in 2026 and 2027. Now, can Europe, realistically speaking, afford to support Ukraine in the long term without these frozen assets? And what happens after 2027? If the war still rages on?
Well, this is a question of a broader economic security strategy of the EU. We need to think proactively. We need to think long-term. We need to continue supporting Ukraine as long as it's needed, because Ukraine is fighting for the security of the European continent. So it's our vital interest to continue supporting. If needed, if the EU doesn't reach a consensus, the European taxpayer will need to chip in. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but let's see.
The European taxpayer may have to chip in. Now, don't you think that the war fatigue that we are actually feeling right here in Europe is that it would be just, a touch too much for the European taxpayer to indeed pay even more if the Russian money is there?
European taxpayers are also people that witnessed across Europe numerous attacks of Russian sabotage. So what we've been witnessing in last months is that Russia is becoming increasingly aggressive and is trying to undermine European internal security. So it's our vital interest to indeed keep supporting Ukraine, but also to look into our own backyard and see how Russia is undermining our democracies, undermining our economic and social resilience.
Why is Russia ramping up its sabotage campaign in Europe right now?
Well, just to put a bit more pressure, but also just to test our resilience. The model of Russian sabotage is quite cheap for Russia. Russia is often recruiting disposable agents, one-day agents. They recruit them, Russian agents, they recruit them via social media, very often Telegram. They pay them via cryptocurrencies, very small amounts. So for Russia, it's cheap, it's effective, the sort of agency is easily deniable, but the impact can be enormous if such an act of sabotage is successful. That would undermine the feeling and sort of the perception of our security and social resilience.
Right, so the Polish government has prepared a bill on regulating the cryptocurrency issue, also to face this threat of Russian sabotage in Europe. Do you think that this bill is much needed in this regard?
It's very much needed. Cryptocurrencies are being currently used by Russia and other hostile states to circumvent the G7 sanctions. They are used to procure and purchase dual-use goods that end up fueling military equipment, Russian military equipment, and they are used to pay for Russian sabotage on our own territory. Unregulated over-the-counter exchanges are a weak point, something we should look into. And basically, not supervising cryptocurrencies and other alternative financial systems just creates a permissive financial ecosystem to finance Russia's activities globally, but also in Europe.
We've begun with money and we must end now. Also talking about money, Kinga Redłowska, Director of the Centre for Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute Europe, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Maciej.
And thank you for watching and stay with us for more interviews and news here on TVP World.